Prepare yourself for one of the most electrifying showdowns you'll ever witness. In this gripping tale, a seemingly humble bartender in a quiet Arizona town finds her world turned upside down when a ruthless biker gang tries to seize control. Little do these outlaws know she's hiding an elite Delta Force background, and she's more than ready to defend her new home at any cost. From secret ambushes to heart-stopping chases in the desert. Moonlight, every moment is packed with tension, courage, and raw determination, curious about who triumphs when the dust finally settles. Don't miss out on the full story. Hit that subscribe button right now to show your support and stay updated on more thrilling narratives. Trust us, you'll want to be in the front seat for all the twists, turns, and ultimate resolution of this high-stakes conflict. Join the community, share your thoughts, and help keep these incredible stories coming. The scorching Arizona sun cast long-awaited shadows across the highway leading to Willow's End, a quaint desert town that few tourists bothered to visit. The desert scenery was both harsh and alluring, miles of red sandstone, tumbleweeds dancing in the breeze, and an endless sky that turned pink and gold at sunrise. At the center of this quiet realm stood the Thunderbird Roadhouse, a modest bar with a peeling sign that once boasted neon lights. Now, the lights were mostly broken, flickering half-heartedly at dusk. Locals still gathered nightly, sharing dusty stories over cold beer and jukebox tunes on the surface. It looked like any other roadside watering hole in the American Southwest, where leather-vested truckers stopped for a whiskey, and older couples paused on cross-country drives inside the bar. An understated woman named Sam wiped the counter with a faded rag. Her posture was unassuming, and her clothes, a loose-fitting shirt and worn jeans, did little to distinguish her from the dusty patrons. Yet there was a quiet intensity in her movements. She seemed to count footsteps near the door without turning her head, and anticipate arrivals before they opened it to the casual observer. Sam was just the bartender, silent, diligent, and polite to a fault. But to those with a keener eye, something about her hinted at an unspoken past. It could be the subtle shift of her stance when a stranger walked in, or the way her gaze swept the room, gauging potent IAL threats. Thunderbird Roadhouse was her sanctuary, a place she'd claimed out of necessity. The building itself was older than the highway that cut through the desert. Its sagging wooden roof and dusty rafters had endured countless storms and scorching summers. Sam had taken ownership a few years back, through a deal nobody else in town fully understood. She arrived with little explanation and even less fanfare. One day, she was an unfamiliar face at a diner near the local gas station. The next, she owned the Roadhouse, quietly fixing pipes, repainting walls, and restocking shelves with calm efficiency. When she finally opened for business, the townsfolk took a curious interest, but her polite smile and spare conversation soon quelled any rumors that she might be trouble. Despite her reticence, Sam was far from unkind. She'd nod in greeting to each customer, offer a sympathetic ear when regulars griped about the desert heat or local politics, and sometimes slip a free drink to Fletcher, a retired mechanic whose pension never stretched far enough. Small gestures like these endeared her to the community, and people found comfort in her steady presence. She never pried into anyone's personal life, and in return, no one pried into hers. At least not openly over the last few months. However, rumors had swirled about a biker gang robbing the highways. They called themselves the Stone Jackals, or so folks whispered. They made their presence felt in other small towns, sometimes pushing local businesses to pay for protection while they hadn't appeared in Willow's End. Yet a creeping sense of unease settled in the hearts of those who heard the stories strangely. Sam grew more watchful whenever talk of the Stone Jackal arose. It was a slight tightening of her jaw, a flicker in her cool gray eyes. To anyone who noticed, it was as if she already knew they would come, like she was preparing for a storm. Only she could sense on a blistering afternoon, Sam leaned her hip against the bar, scanning the room with a measured look. Regulars filled their usual seats. Fletcher hunched over his beer at the far end, Pearl the waitress from a nearby cafe nursing a soda, and a small group of ranch hands sharing raucous laughter in a corner. Booth outside Sycus droned in the heat. The jukebox sputtered an old country tune, its speakers crackling with sage despite the friendly chatter. Sam felt a certain tension stretching through the air, as if the entire town was actively holding its breath. The rumor of the Stone Jackal had spread quickly, and speculation about what they might do if they arrived in Willow's End had become a common topic. Some folks express bravado and let them come. We can handle ourselves, they declare with forced confidence. Others merely shrugged and said they'd believe it when they saw it. Sam's dark hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, revealing the faintest scar near her temple, one of the many hidden stories etched into her skin. She noticed Pearl staring at it curiously, but the waitress looked away before saying anything. Sam had grown accustomed to these lingering glances. People sensed an aura of danger around her, as if she carried unseen baggage. Yet no one pressed her about it in a place like Willowen. Personal histories were best left to unravel in their own time. That afternoon, the gossip about the Stone Jackal was abruptly overshadowed by a different commotion. Old man Fletcher stood up unsteadily from his stool, stifling a cough. He claimed he could fix the air conditioning unit perched precariously above the bar's entrance. As he fiddled with the control box outside, his precarious balance gave way in a flash. Sam darted around the bar and out the door. Without hesitation, she seized Fletcher's belt with one hand and the AC unit with the other, preventing a nasty fall. The speed and strength she displayed in that split second left onlookers stunned. How could this quiet bartender react with such lightning reflexes? A ripple of murmurs passed through the bar's patrons. Pearl rushed to help, but Sam had already stabilized Fletcher and guided him gently to a chair. "Just take it easy," she said in her low, reassuring voice. Fletcher blinked at her in surprise, mumbling something about his old age getting the best of him. The ranch hands exchanged knowing glances, a mixture of awe and curiosity crossing their faces for Sam. It was just another moment where her hidden capabilities emerged unbidden. She had tried so hard to live beneath the radar, to blend into the background. Yet sometimes instincts took over. Before she could think twice, she silently returned to her post behind the bar, grabbing a glass of water for Fletcher and setting it before him. If anyone wanted to ask questions about her swift reflexes, they held their tongues instead. The conversation drifted back to the usual topics: hay bales, weekend rodeos, and the dryness of the season. But a quiet sense of admiration lingered in the air. Sam herself felt torn between relief and anxiety. Every time she revealed a sliver of her old self, she risked drawing more attention than she wanted. Yet, she couldn't help but step in when someone needed her help. Deep down, she suspected it was only a matter of time before bigger challenges arrived at her doorstep later that evening, long after the sunset bled fiery orange into the horizon. The Thunderbird Roadhouse remained a small oasis of light in the surrounding darkness. The hum of was broken and intermittent, but a few lamps illuminated the gravel parking lot. The night air, cooler than the day, searing temperature, invited a handful of customers to linger outside sipping beer and gazing at the sprawling scoping. Beyond the edges of town, the desert expanded into a moonlit tapestry of cacti and stone formations. Inside, Sam methodically cleaned the counter and tallied the day's receipts. Her eyes occasionally flitted to the entrance whenever the door creaked. Most of the patrons had headed home, but a couple of stragglers still occupied a booth, chatting in hushed voices on evenings like this. Sam found a strange sense of solace in the routine tasks of closing the bar. Wiping tables, restocking shelves, and checking the locks had a calming, meditative quality that helped her quiet the echoes of her past. Still, the memory of her sudden burst of speed earlier that day bothered her. She wondered if she had been too reckless in revealing her reflexes in her old life. Such an act would have been unremarkable. She was expected to move swiftly to anticipate danger and protect her team here in Willows, and such agility drew attention, curiosity, perhaps even suspicion. Sam paused, staring at her reflection in the bar's antique mirror. In the dim light, she saw a worn face with eyes that had seen too much. She took a breath, reminding herself that the kind-hearted townsfolk had no real reason to suspect the truth. Behind her practice, calm, a creak from the front door pulled her from her thoughts. In stepped a figure unfamiliar to her, a tall man in a leather vest, the insignia on his chest matching the rumors a stylized jackal's skull. Her pulse quickened, though she kept her face neutral. The man surveyed the nearly empty bar, paused on Sam for a moment, then drifted over to a table in the corner. She noted how he carried himself, shoulders squared, a hint of swagger, a member of the Stone Jackal here in Willows. And Sam approached him with practiced calm. "What can I get you?" she asked, voice steady. The man smirked, scanning the room again before meeting her gaze. "Whiskey?" he replied curtly. Sam nodded and poured him a glass. She set it down without comment and waited a moment. He watched her carefully as if trying to read the person standing before him. After a tense silence, he took a sip and said, "Name's Boyd. I hear this town's got some interesting folks." Sam offered a non-committal shrug. "We're a quiet bunch." Boyd's eyes narrowed, noticing perhaps how Sam's posture was a bit too controlled. Yet, he said nothing else, sensing he wasn't in the mood for small talk. She returned to her tasks, never letting him slip out of her peripheral vision. Time seemed to stretch as he finished his drink. When he finally rose to leave, he tossed a few bills on the table and flashed a crooked grin. "Might be back soon," he said. The words felt more like a warning than a promise. Sam watched him exit into the desert night, her breath hitching slightly. The Stone Jackal had arrived and the clock had started ticking on the fragile peace she'd worked so hard to maintain. From that moment on, Sam's Q&As were marked by a subtle tension she couldn't shake. Willow's End had always been quiet after dark. Now it felt laden with a kind of suspense. She rarely saw Boyd in the following days, but she heard whispers that he and a few other bikers were seen. Crew in the highways that snaked around the desert. Some townsfolks shrugged it off, saying that bikers passed through all the time. Others, more nervous by nature, cast wary glances at strangers on motorcycles. Sam, for her part, maintained an outward calm. She served drinks, chatted cordially with customers, and made sure the roadhouse remained an inviting space inside. However, she was quietly preparing. Her years of training had taught her never to be caught off guard. Though she'd left that life behind. Old habits die hard. She double-checked the locks on the roadhouse each night and took note of every new face that walked through the door. She started cleaning the back storeroom more frequently, an excuse to ensure her hidden trunk remained safely tucked away. Inside that trunk were tools of a trade she hoped never to practice again over the years. She'd sold or discarded much of her arsenal, but she held on to a few relics for emergencies: a compact M9 pistol, a reliable Remington shotgun, and a specialized combat knife etched with an eagle's insignia. Each item carried memories she'd rather forget, yet she knew better than to discard them outright. Meanwhile, life in Willow's End ambled along as usual, with local farmers tending their crops. and the high school preparing for a county-wide sports meet. People gossiped about the influx of tourists heading to the Grand Canyon rather than any real trouble with bikers. If anything, the presence of a solitary stone jackal like Boyd was seen more as a curiosity than a threat, except by Sam, who recognized the ripples such a presence could create. She'd seen it before. A few scouts show up, test the waters, and then report back if the town seemed right for exploitation. One late afternoon, as Sam restocked the fridge with bottled beer, she overheard Pearl and a couple of ranchers discussing an alleged run-in with a group of bikers near the state highway. The ranchers claimed that they were forced off the shoulder when the rider sped by, nearly causing them to crash their pickup. They were laughing. One rancher fumed, shaking his head like it was all some big game. Pearl, eyes wide, said she'd heard the sheriff in a nearby county was investigating property damage linked to a biker gang. Sam placed the last of the bottles on the shelf, her mind racing with possibilities. Could the stone jackals be behind this? And if so, how many of them were gathering that night? Sam waited until the bar was empty and locked up earlier than usual. She set out for a drive along the dusty road leading away from Willow's End, passing sparse clusters of cacti and cracked earth. Her goal was simple: gather information. She cruised slowly, headlights cutting through the darkness, scanning for tire tracks or signs of a campsite. If the stone jackal were indeed converging nearby, she intended to find out, though her plan was improvised. It reminded her of old missions' reconnaissance stealth readiness. For a moment, she felt the adrenaline spike that once had been a daily part of her life. It was both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. A tug-of-war between her present identity as a quiet bartender and the warrior she had once been. Sam drove for nearly an hour across back roads that wound through scrubland and weathered hills. Moonlight revealed the silhouettes of saguaro cacti standing like silent sentinels in the night. She kept her eyes peeled for any unusual activity, groups of motorcycles, the glow of a campfire even fresh. Tire marks leading off the main path, yet the desert was vast, and she found little concrete evidence. A few times she pulled over to check footprints near a dry wash or examine tracks that looked recent. Each time the wind howled across the sand, providing no answers. Eventually, she turned back toward Willow's End, wrestling with a mixture of relief and unease. On one hand, there seemed to be no large encampment of bikers nearby. On the other, a group like the Stone Jackals rarely telegraphed their presence so openly. The fact that Sam had spotted no clear sign of them could mean they were scattered or simply more covert than she anticipated. When she returned to the roadhouse, she found the parking lot empty, save for her old pickup. The neon sign flickered, throwing ghostly shadows across the gravel. Sam stepped out and lingered outside the door, letting the desert wind whip across her face. She closed her eyes, recalling her time as an operative in Delta Force missions often began under the cloak of darkness, driven by intelligence that was vague or incomplete. She remembered the nerve-wracking tension of not knowing whether the enemy was hiding just beyond the horizon. Back then, she'd had a team, a group of skilled comrades who watched each other's backs. Here, she stood alone in the weeks that followed. Sam's watchfulness, heightened words spread slowly through the local grapevine that more bikers were being seen on the highways around the region. Fewer truckers dropped by the roadhouse late at night. Unwilling to risk an encounter on the open road one afternoon, Pearl mentioned that a store owner in a town 2 hours away claimed to have been harassed by a small group wearing stone jackal patches. They demanded a protection fee and old racket. Sam had seen play out in troubled areas overseas. The store owner had refused, and the men allegedly trashed his shop in retaliation. Sam's jaw tightened as she heard the account, despite the rising tension. Willow's End itself remained untouched. Some optimists believed they might be spared, guessing that the stone jackal would skip a town so small it barely registered on a map. Sam, how sensed a calm before the storm from her vantage point behind the bar. She observed the mood of her patrons, subdued, conversations, nervous laughter, uncertain glances at every new arrival. She tried to project an aura of confidence, even though she felt the weight of her old instincts pressing down on her late one night. As she closed up her phone, buzzed a message from a number she hadn't seen in years. Only one line flashed on the screen. Heard. You might need backup. Sam stared at it, heart pounding. Memories rushed back. Secret missions, close calls, friendships forged in adversity. She typed a measured response, not yet. Though she had pushed away her old life, it seemed her old life hadn't entirely let go of her. She watched the message send, feeling the odd comfort of knowing she was not as alone as she sometimes feared, but also the dread that she might need to call upon those connections sooner than she cared to admit. As the days turned into weeks, Sam found herself growing ever more protective of the roadhouse and the people who frequented it. She reinforced the back door's locking mechanism, installed a simple security camera that she concealed under the eaves, and discreetly tested the lights in the parking lot to ensure they wouldn't fail in an emergency to the casual observer. Her actions were simply those of a cautious business owner, and no one questioned her diligence. Still, the sense of unease in Willow's End grew more palpable. Even those who scoffed at the rumor of a biker gang started locking their doors at night. The tension finally broke one afternoon when a small group of stone jackal thundered into town. A handful of motorcycles rumbled down Main Street, drawing stares from every shop window. Dust and gravel sprayed behind them as they pulled up in front of the Thunderbird Roadhouse. Sam spotted them through the window, her breath hitching. For the briefest moment, there were 4 of them, each wearing the telltale leather vest with the snarling jackal skull logo leading the pack. Was Boyd, the man who'd come in for a whiskey that first night. With grim resolve, Sam placed a dishcloth over her shoulder and stepped outside before they could even dismount. She noted the immediate hush that fell over the handful of locals on the street. Boy took off his helmet, shaking out his greasy hair. "Afternoon," he drawled, eyeing Sam with a predatory smirk. The other bikers stared at her, their expressions ranging from bored to openly menacing. Sam remained calm, her eyes cool and steady as she asked, "You looking for a drink?" Boyd chuckled, swinging his leg off the bike. "We might be looking for more than that," he said, gesturing vaguely at the bar. "Heard this place makes for a good hangout spot. Might want to expand our interest here." The Inu window was clear. Sam forced a polite smile. "We're open, if you want to come in, but no trouble." Her tone was casual, but there was an unmistakable edge to it, a warning that caused one of the bikers to give her a second sharper glance. Boyd tilted his head, a flicker of curiosity, crossing his face. "And if we're not here just for a drink?" he asked. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken threats. Sam didn't waver. "Then, I'd ask you to leave," she answered. Simply, the tension was electric, but after a beat, Boyd burst out laughing. "Come on, boys," he said, slapping one of his men on the shoulder. "Let's sample the hospitality with that." They strutted into the roadhouse, their heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. Sam trailed behind her, mind working overtime. She hated confrontations, but would not be intimidated. The handful of patrons inside immediately grew silent upon seeing the biker gang enter, and she could feel the fear rolling off them in waves. She walked behind the bar, standing tall. "Name your poison," she said, reaching for clean glasses. Boyd leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "A round of whiskey," he said. Then, with a grin that hinted at trouble, he added, "Let's see if your place can handle us." Sam glanced at his smirking companions and maintained her composure. Inwardly, her adrenaline soared. She could almost sense the storm brewing, and for all her attempts to stay anonymous and peaceful, she knew a confrontation was inching ever closer. Inside the Thunderbird Roadhouse, tension hung thick. As Sam ported whiskey for the bikers, Boyd and his men took a table near the window, shoving chairs aside, and speaking in low, mocking tones. The handful of regulars, uneasy under the newcomer's gaze, paid their bills, and left one by one. Even Pearl, who usually stayed until closing, made a quick exit, whispering a worried goodbye to Sam before hurrying out the door. Soon, the only people left were Sam behind the bar in the Four-Stone Jackal. Sam placed the whiskey glasses on a tray and carried them over on the house. "This time," she said flatly, hoping it might diffuse the situation. Boyd raised an eyebrow, then smirked, generous. He commented one of his companions, a stocky man with a scar running down his neck, downed his shot in one gulp. "Why so quiet?" "Bartender," he taunted, "you afraid of us?" Sam gave him a measured look. "I'm just not much of a talker," she replied, keeping her voice steady. The men exchanged glances, clearly amused. They seemed to relish the power they wielded through intimidation. Boyd leaned back in his chair, propping his boots on the table. "Word is, we might be setting up some operations nearby," he said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "We like to make friends, wherever we go. Friends who understand how things work." Sam kept her expression neutral, recognizing the implied shakedown boy continued a place like this off the main road, but still gets traffic. Could be very useful to us. Sam carefully chose her words. "I'm not interested in new partners," she said. "I run the roadhouse by myself." Boy chuckled, exchanging a look with his men. "Let's just say that if you cooperate, you'll find us to be very protective. If not, well, accidents happen." His tone was light, but the menace behind it was unmistakable. The roadhouse suddenly felt small, and the overhead lights seemed to buzz louder than normal. For a long moment, no one moved. Sam could practically feel her pulse pounding in her ears. She had lived through enough real battles to know the difference between bluffing and true danger, and these men with their hardened eyes and easy threats were more than capable of violence. Carefully, she placed her hand on the back of a nearby chair. "I'm just a bartender," she said. "If you want to finish your drinks, go ahead. But if you're trying to scare me, you're wasting your time." In the charged silence, the stocky biker with the scar scoffed. He half rose from his chair, fists clenched, until Boyd shot him a warning glance with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Boyd stood up as well. He pulled out a few crumpled bills, tossed them on the table, and then leaned in close to Sam. "We'll be in touch," he murmured, the hint of a threat threading through his voice. Then he and his men walked out their footsteps, each in on the wooden planks. Sam watched from the doorway as they revved their engines and tore down the street in a cloud of dust. She exhaled slowly, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She knew they would be back, and that the next visit would likely be far less cal. The days that followed were a study and unease, for both Sam and Willow's end words spread quickly, that the Stone Jackal had saint acclaim on the roadhouse. At least in their eyes, locals approached Sam with worried looks, asking if it'd be okay. She would offer a reassuring nod, but gave few details, not wanting to feed into the growing panic. Yet behind her calm facade, her mind churned with possibilities. How far would Boyd and his gang go? Would they resort to immediate violins, or would they try to coer the town into submission? First, Sam found temporary comfort in routine tasks. She polished glasses until they gleamed, reorganized the storeroom, and even repainted a portion of the exterior wall that had been covered in dust. In minor graffiti at night, she locked up early, whenever traffic was slow, heading home to her small trailer on the outskirts of town. Once there, she examined her hidden trunk of old equipment, checking the weapons for rust or malfunction. The mere act of holding her old sidearm caused memories to flood back, fragments of operations, the echo of gunfire, the faces of comrades she hadn't seen in years. It was a life she desperately wanted to leave behind. But as the tension grew, she felt the slow, inexorable pull of her past, urging her to be ready for what might come. The stone jackals didn't make an immediate return, but their presence was felt in other ways. A local rancher reported that two men on motorcycles had confronted him about letting them use an abandoned barn for storage. When he refused, they slashed his truck's tires. Another resident swore he saw a biker scoping out the local diner, scribbling notes in a small notepad. Rumors flared about extortion attempts in towns farther up the highway, and each time the whispered question arose, when will they come back for the roadhouse? Sam knew the question was not if, but when. Late one evening, after she had closed up, she sat alone in a corner table, nursing a cup of black coffee. The neon sign outside flickered in the window's reflection, mirroring the uncertainty she felt. She thought about calling that old number, the one that had texted her earlier about backup. But the notion of dragging someone else into this fight made her stomach turn. She remembered too vividly the sting of loss, the weight of responsibility. When things went sideways on a mission, bringing someone else into her personal battle felt was selfish. Still, her rational side argued that there was no way she could face an entire biker gang alone. Not if they decided to come at her with real force. She also feared for the safety of Willow's End, which lacked the resources to fend off a violent gang. The sheriff's department was miles away, chronically understaffed, and rarely ventured into these remote parts, unless there was a severe emergency. Sam could almost hear her old commanding officer's voice in her head. No one fights alone. Carter, learn to use every ally you have. The next morning, she made the decision, slipping into her truck. She drove to the spot where cell reception was strongest and pulled up the message on her phone. Heard? You might need backup. Her fingers trembled as she typed. Could you use some extra eyes on this? Let me know if you are free. She hesitated, then pressed send. Her heart pounded. Knowing there was no turning back now, she had just opened a door to her past, hoping it might help protect her. Present, the reply came faster than Sam anticipated. Early the following day, her phone buzzed while she was unloading a crate of bottled water. The message read, in the area, I'll be in touch. No name, no signature. Just a terse, calm confirmation. Sam's heart thudded in her chest. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, scanning the bar to ensure no one had noticed her momentary lapse in composure. The roadhouse was quiet at this hour, and she intended to keep it that way. If help was coming, she didn't want the whole town to know, nor did she want to tip off the stone jackal for the next few days. Sam went about business as usual. Though her mind buzzed with speculation, who had answered her call, she had reached out to a single number that belled to a trusted contact from her Delta Force days, a man code-named Hawk. He'd been a skilled sniper and close-quarter specialist known for his stoic demeanor and unwavering loyalty to his team. But the message that arrived could have come from anyone in her old circle. The unspoken vow among them was that if one ever reached out, the others would do what they could. That bond had been forged in the crucible of life-threatening missions, and it was not easily broken. Meanwhile, the stone jackal continued to stir up trouble in the region. A few towns over, a diner was vandalized and spray painted with the gang's insignia in willows, and a local rancher discovered one of his fences cut, allowing cattle to wander loose. though no one had concrete proof. It was the bikers. The timing felt too convenient to be a coincidence. People whispered that the roadhouse might be the next target given, that Sam had supposedly disrespected Boyd by refusing to cooperate. Tension simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over. Late one evening, Sam stepped outside for a breath of fresh air after closing. The desert sky glittered with stars, a stark contrast to the turmoil she felt. A distant rumble of motorcycles echoed, but she couldn't see headlights on the horizon. Still, she tensed, hand drifting subconsciously to her waist as though searching for a holster that wasn't there. She let out a slow breath, reminding herself to remain calm. That's when she heard a car approaching its engine, softer than that of a motorcycle. Headlights cut through the darkness, revealing a dark SUV rolling into the gravel parking lot. Sam's pulse quickened. She'd never seen that vehicle before. Her instincts flared, and she eased her stance, ready for anything. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a figure, clad in jeans and a leather jacket. No gang insignia visible. The person lifted a hand in greeting. "Sam," the stranger said. Voice low and calm in the dim light, she recognized the silhouette, the face partially obscured by the SUV's glare. A swirl of emotions, relief, anxiety, gratitude washed over her. One thing was certain, the reinforcements had arrived, and with them the past. She'd tried so hard to bury, stepping forward. She managed a faint smile, bracing herself for the next chapter of her life in Willow's End. Part of her feared what might come next. But another part, the soldier she had once been, felt a surge of resolve. If the stone jackals wanted to fight, they would find that the silent bartender of Thunderbird Roadhouse was more than capable of defending her turf. Sam's eyes adjusted to the glare of the headlights as the SUV's engine fell silent. The figure who emerged looked both familiar and foreign against the desert backdrop. He stood tall, lean, but solid, with a confident stance that told Sam he hadn't lost his edge since their days in the service. His face was partially in shadow, but when he stepped closer, the dim bar lights revealed the unmistakable features of the man they used to call Hawk. A faint scar traced a path along his jawline, one he'd earned on a mission that felt like a lifetime ago in the tense quiet of the Arizona night. Sam felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief at the sight of an old ally, guilt for dragging him into her personal war, and a hint of unease for the memories that threatened to resurface. Hawk broke the silence with a low, steady greeting. "Heard, you might need another set of eyes," he said, echoing the message he had sent. Sam gave him a tight nod. "Didn't expect you to show up so fast." Hawk shrugged casually, surveying the roadhouse's gravel lot. "I was already in the region doing some contract work. Didn't think twice. When I got your text?" He spoke quietly, as though his presence here was meant to be a secret kept from the entire world. His gaze drifted to the flickering neon sign of the Thunderbird Roadhouse, taking in the peeling paint and dim lights. "Nice place you've got. Reminds me of some of those outposts we set up overseas, isolated but strategic, if used right." Sam managed a wry smile, remembering how adept Hawk had been at sizing up terrain in defenses. He could transform any dilapidated building into a fortified stronghold with just a few sandbags and barbed wire. She gestured toward the roadhouse door. "Come inside," she said, unlocking it again, even though she'd closed for the night. "Might as well talk where it's private." The pair stepped in, and Sam flipped on a single overhead light that bathed the bar in a gentle glow. Hawk walked around slowly, scanning corners and doorways with the air of a professional. Sam felt oddly self-conscious, as though the roadhouse and the quiet life she had built were now under a microscope. "I've kept it low-key," she explained. "Didn't want to raise suspicions." Hawk nodded smart. But if the situation's as serious as you hinted, we'll need to make some adjustments. He paused, pulling out a bar stool and sitting down. Tell me about these bikers. Sam leaned against the counter, crossing her arms over her chest. She recounted everything from the first encounter with Boyd to the rumors of extortion and vandalism in nearby towns. Hawk listened intently, the occasional twitch in his jaw betraying his concern. When she finished, he exhaled, tapping the bar lightly with his fingertips. Sounds like a classic intimidation campaign, he said. They'll keep pushing until they either get what they want or someone forces them to back down. And by someone, I'm guessing they won't respect the local sheriff. Sam let out a mirthless chuckle. The sheriff's department is too far away, too understaffed, and these guys know that. She paused, searching Hawk's face. I didn't call you because I wanted a fight. I just needed to be ready. Hawk nodded. Understood. You're not alone anymore. But if we're going up against a real gang, we might need more than just the two of us. Let's see how deep the operation runs, then decide our next move, Sam. Pressed her lips together silently, acknowledging the gravity of the path they were about to tread. The roadhouse suddenly felt both comforting and vulnerable, a symbol of the new life she'd tried to build, now threatened by ghosts from the past and predators in the present. Over the next few days, Hawk slipped inconspicuously into Willow's End, taking up temporary residence in a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. He paid in cash, used an Alien A check-in, and introduced himself to curious neighbors as an out-of-tour on a short business trip. With Sam's quiet assistance, he began a systematic reconnaissance of the area, looking for any signs of stone jackal activity. Willow's End wasn't large, but its remote location and network of branching roads made it an ideal spot for a gang to hide, regroup, or funnel illicit goods each morning. Hawk would circle the highways in an old sedan he'd borrowed from a contact in a neighboring county. Nothing flashy, just a forgettable four-door that blended in. He noted tire tracks, observed outlying properties, and even struck up idle conversation at a local diner 2 towns over where rumors suggested a group of bikers had been spotted. Meanwhile, Sam kept the Thunderbird Roadhouse running as usual. Though her nerves were on edge, every clang of a motorcycle engine in the distance made her tense. Each new customer who wore leather or had a rugged demeanor set her on high alert until she determined they were harmless travelers. She kept her old M9 pistol locked in the back office, ensuring it was clean and loaded. The shotgun and combat knife stayed hidden in her trailer for now, but the knowledge of their proximity provided a measure of comfort. Hawk spent his evenings at the roadhouse, always arriving at different times, never staying long enough to arouse suspicion. He'd nurse a single beer chat, casually with Sam at the bar, and then slip out. Their conversations were peppered with references to shipping delays or supply chain issues whenever they needed to talk about the bikers in the corner of the roadhouse. An old security camera quietly recorded footage that Hawk would later review. Sam had upgraded the camera's angle, ensuring it covered the parking lot in the main road one afternoon. Hawk returned from his scouting, looking unusually grim. He signaled Sam with a subtle nod as he walked into the bar, which was nearly empty at this hour. Taking a seat far from the few customers present, he sipped his drink in silence until Pearl, the local waitress, left. Then Sam approached, speaking under her breath. "Find something?" Hawk tapped the rim of his glass. "Couple miles out. There's an abandoned service station. Looks like someone's been staying there. Saw fresh tire tracks, some cigarette butts. Maybe a small group also found a stone jackal patch on the ground near the entrance. Probably torn off someone's vest. Could be they're using it as a meet-up spot." Sam's heart sank. The idea of a hidden biker hideout so close to Willow's End was unsettling to say the least. "Any sign of heavy weapons?" she asked quietly. Hawk shook his head. Not yet, but these guys are too organized for a handful of pistols and knives. I'm betting they have a stash somewhere. They lapsed into silence as a local rancher ambled to the bar, tipping his hat politely to Sam before placing an order. Once the man left with his beer, Sam murmured, "We can't let them get a foothold here. If they dig in this town, won't stand a chance." Hawk's expression. Hardin agreed, "But we need to gather solid intel first, who their leader is, where they store their weapons, how many men they've got on standby. Then we plan our move." Sam nodded, but uneased, noted at her. She could almost sense the storm clouds gathering over Willow's End. The tension that had once been subtle was now a low rumble threatening to erupt. She cast a glance around the quiet bar, wishing for simpler days. Yet, beneath her concern, a spark of grim determination flickered. She had walked away from a life of combat once, but if it came down to protecting what she loved, she would not hesitate to pick up that mantle again, as Hawk and Sam quietly gathered information. Boyd's men made their presence felt in less subtle ways. It began with small acts of vandalism, spray-painted logos on abandoned building, menacing graffiti, warning locals to mind their business. Trash bins were overturned along Main Street late at night, giving the previously tidy thoroughfare a sense of disarray. By morning, the townspeople, already wary, grew more unsettled. A few of the braver souls in Willow's End tried talking to the bikers whenever they roared into town. One local mechanic named Dalton approached them in the gas station parking lot, offering a handshake and free tune-ups to keep things friendly. He was met with mocking laugh in a sneered reply that they didn't need a desert hick telling them how to handle their machines. Another day, Pearl timidly offered the group a free slice of pie at the cafe. Hoping kindness might soften their demeanor, they responded by leaving her a measly tip of a few pennies scattered across the counter in a silent insult. Each incident, though small on its own, painted a picture of simmering hostility. Sam watched from the roadhouse windows from behind the bar, and sometimes from Hawk's borrowed sedan as they scouted the outskirts. The bikers seemed to operate in small packs, 3 or 4 at a time, rarely showing their full strength, but always hinting at the bigger force behind them. One evening, just as Sam was preparing to close Boyd himself, stroll into the bar, reeking of whiskey and swagger, he plopped down at a table with odds so much as a greeting. His eyes were bloodshot, and the corner of his mouth twitched with a half-formed smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sam approached cautiously. "We closing soon," she said in a level tone. "Last call, boy," let out a low chuckle. "You should keep this place open all night for us. We're your best customers now, aren't we?" His voice carried a threat, disguised as a guest. Sam merely raised an eyebrow. "I serve anyone who follows the rules," she replied, "but you've got 5 minutes to order." He leaned closer, his breath foul with alcohol. "Here's the deal, bartender. We want in on your business. Could be as simple as a weekly fee for our protection. You pay. We keep the trouble away." Sam suppressed a surge of anger. "There's no trouble here, except what you bring," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "And I'm not paying." Boyd laughed loudly, his voice echoing off the bar's wooden walls. "That's where you're wrong. Trouble's coming, whether you like it or not." His eyes flicked to the few remaining patrons, 2 old ranch hands who seemed frozen in place. "Think about it," he said, rising from his seat and swaying slightly. "This place is vulnerable. We can make your life real easy, or real hard, without waiting for a response." He staggered to the door and kicked it open, lumbering out into the night. Sam let out a slow breath, gripping a nearby chair to steady herself. She looked at the ranch hands who eyed her sympathetically and tried to project a confidence she didn't fully feel deep inside, though. The well of her old self. The hardened operative who had survived countless perilous missions was stirring in the face of such blatant threats. Retreat was not an option. When the bar finally emptied, Sam locked the doors and slumped against the wall, fatigue weighing on her. Outside the desert, wind kicked up dust and debris, swirling them into the starlit sky. She thought of Hawk, who was likely perched somewhere in the darkness, watching. Waiting for better or worse, the fight she had hoped to avoid was knocking on the door of the Thunderbird Roadhouse, determined to seize the initiative. Sam and Hawk agreed that a more direct look at the bikers' gathering spots was in order. The abandoned service station Hawk had discovered seemed like the perfect place to start. Late one night, under a moonless sky, they loaded up Hawk's borrowed sedan with a small assortment of gear, binoculars, flashlights, and a camera with a telephoto lens. Sam carried her M9 concealed beneath a worn canvas jacket, while Hawk had a compact revolver tucked at the small of his back. They weren't looking for a fight, but they knew better than to venture out unarmed. They left Willow's End by a roundabout route, taking a narrow desert road that looped around hills and cacti with the headlights switched off. Hawk navigated by starlight in memory. Creeping along at a snail's pace, the darkness pressed in on them, an enveloping cloak that felt both protective and ominous. Sam's heart hammered in her chest, a mixture of adrenaline and dread coursing through her veins. She cast a sideways glance at Hawk, who was calm as ever. Eyes focused, jaw set in determination. Eventually, the faint silhouette of the old service station came into view. Hawk pulled the sedan off the road, parking behind a clump of mesquite bushes. They got out quietly, closing the doors behind them. The night air was crisp, carrying the subtle scent of sagebrush. Together, they advanced on foot, using the natural cover of desert shrubs to hide their approach. In the distance, the crumbling structure stood silent and dark. Its roof partially collapsed a few hundred yards away. They paused. Sam raised the binoculars and studied the surroundings. In the service station looked deserted at first glance. No lights in the windows, no motorcycles in sight. But as her eyes adjusted, she noted subtle hints of recent activity. Footprints around a side door, fresh tire tracks cutting across the dirt lot. She whispered her observations to Hawk, who nodded in agreement. They crept closer, boots crunching. Softly on the sandy ground at a broken window, Hawk gestured for Sam to keep watch, while he slid inside with a silent nod. She covered him, scanning the horizon for any sign of headlights or movement. Seconds ticked by like hours until Hawk's figure reappeared, climbing back out with measured stealth. He waved Sam over to a corner where they crouched behind a stack of discarded wooden pallets, empty now. Hawk murmured, voice barely above a breath. But they've got supplies stashed. Crates of canned goods, water, and some ammo boxes. Didn't open them, but they're definitely stocking up. Sam felt a tightness in her chest. So they're planning to stick around, she said grimly. Maybe even expand operations. Hawk nodded. This is more than just a hideout. It looks like a forward base. They're setting the stage for something bigger before they could discuss further. The distant roar of motorcycle engines shattered the silence. A cold jolt of fear slammed through Sam. She and Hawk exchanged urgent looks, then hastily retreated behind the station to avoid being caught in the open. The engines grew louder, accompanied by the crunch of gravel. Sam's hand found the grip of her M9. Her pulse raced as headlights swept across the dilapidated building, peering from the shadows. They saw two motorcycles roll to a stop near the front entrance. Both riders wore the familiar stone jackal patch. One dismounted Ed and flicked on a flashlight, illuminating the doorway. Sam held her breath, her heart pounding in her ears. If the bikers decided to explore the station thoroughly, a confrontation was inevitable in that moment. All her training came rushing back. Awareness of cover, body positioning, exit routes. She locked eyes with Hawk, who gave a small nod, ready for whatever came next. They crouched in silence, listening to the bikers' rummage around the service station's front area. Muffled voices drifted through the broken windows, though Sam couldn't make out every word from what she could gather. The two men were there to check the supplies and possibly wait for more of their crew. Hawk and Sam pressed themselves against the wall, trying to remain unseen in the darkness. A sudden crash echoed from inside, followed by a burst of crude laughter. Sam tensed, realizing one of the bikers must have knocked over a crate. Their carefree attitude suggested they didn't expect any intruders. She glanced at Hawk, who said, "Signal for her to stay put." Slowly, he angled his head around the corner of the building, trying to get a better visual. In a hushed tone, Hawk relayed what he saw. "They're messing with some boxes near the back. Looks like they're taking inventory." He paused, then added grimly, "They've got at least one shotgun leaning against the wall. Possibly more. Firepower." Sam's stomach tightened. The next move would be critical. Engaging two armed bikers in a deserted location carried huge risks, not just for them, but for the entire plan to gather intel undetected. Yet letting them walk freely might mean the stone jackal would only strengthen their foothold. She weighed the options, recalling the golden rule from her Delta Force days: mission clarity. First, direct engagement, only if absolutely necessary. After a tense moment, Sam mouthed, "We can't blow our cover." Hawk nodded in agreement. Their best bet was to lay low, confirm the gang's capabilities, and slip away, to plan a more decisive of action if they revealed themselves. Now they risked a firefight that could end badly. Not to mention the stone jackal would know they were being watched. Minutes crawled by as the two bikers continued their business. Inside, Sam could feel her muscles start to ache from holding a crouch position, but she dared not move. Any rustle of gravel or scrape of boots could give them away. Occasionally, headlights swept across the nearby road, but no additional motorcycles arrived. Finally, of the men barked, "We're done here," and they headed for the door. Hawk and Sam flattened themselves against the exterior wall as the bikers emerged. The faint glow of the flashlight passed just a few yards away. Sam held her breath, gripping her pistol so tightly that her knuckles burned. She could practically smell the stale cigarette smoke clinging to the men's leather vests. "Let's roll," one biker muttered, tossing the flashlight beam around before clicking it off. Engines roared back to life, and the motor came out. Cycles rumbled out of the lot, their red taillights receding into the darkness. Sam exhaled shakily, relief washing over her for a moment. Neither she nor Hawk spoke, as if unwilling to break the spell of silence. When they finally moved, every muscle protested. Still, they crept back inside the station more cautiously this time to glean whatever they could without disturbing the bikers' stash. Hawk snapped a few discreet photos with his phone, capturing images of stacked crates labeled with various brand names. Then they made their retreat, slipping back into the desert night, only after they reached the sedan. Hearts pounding with residual adrenaline, did they dare to speak above a whisper. "They're better organized than we thought," Hawk said, starting the engine with care to keep the noise minimal. Sam nodded, breathing heavily, "and they're ready to escalate." She gazed at the ruins of the service station as it dwindled in the rearview mirror. The sense of foreboding she'd felt before had solidified into a grim certainty. The stone jackals weren't just passing through, they were planting roots, and that meant all-out conflict was only a matter of time. Back in Willow's End, Sam and Hawk convened late at the roadhouse to discuss the night's findings. Sam locked the doors and flipped a handwritten clothes sign. Even though it was well past operating hours, the interior was dimly lit by a single lamp near the bar, casting long shadows that danced across the walls outside the wind had picked up, rattling the windows and kicking up a haze of dust under the moonlight. Hawk laid his phone on the bar, flipping through the pictures he'd taken at the service station. Grainy images revealed crates of supplies, boxes marked with ammo company logos, and a few battered shelves lined with canned food. "This isn't just a hideout," he reiterated. "They're establishing logistics. Hard to say how many are involved, but it's more than a handful of troublemakers." Sam nodded, eyes fixed on the screen. "Makes sense. They've been testing the waters in town, pushing boundaries to see how we react soon enough. They'll either try to seize control outright or coerce everyone into compliance." She sat down, a steaming mug of coffee. Though her stomach was too knotted to appreciate it, they spent the next hour strategizing. Hawk recommended reaching out to local law enforcement, but Sam shook her head. "Sheriff's Department doesn't have the manpower, and if we alert them without solid proof of criminal activity, they might just do a token patrol." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "These guys are slippery enough to lay low whenever the cops come around. As soon as the patrol leaves, it's back to business." Hawk leaned forward, voice dropping. "We need to draw them out, or at least expose what they're doing. If we can gather undeniable evidence, maybe we can rally the town or get a state-level task force involved." He paused, glancing around as though the bar itself might be ear listening. "Alternatively, we can take a more direct approach." Sam grimaced. "You mean sabotage, hitting them before they can fully entrench?" She walked around the bar, running a hand along its polished surface. "I don't want a war zone in Willow's End. People could get hurt. People will get hurt. If we do nothing," Hawk countered gently. His gaze was unwavering, a look Sam remembered from missions where moral ambiguity weighed heavily on every decision. "We might not have to go in guns blazing, but we could disrupt their supply lines, make it harder for them to operate, maybe sabotage that station enough that it can't be." "Abbas," Sam pressed her lips into a thin line. Memories of covert ops flickered through her mind. Infiltration, planting charges, slipping away, under cover of darkness. She'd done it before successfully, but that had been in combat zones on the other side of the world, wearing the uniform of a soldier. This was supposed to be her retirement, her peaceful refuge. "Let me sleep on it," she finally said. Hawk nodded, respecting the internal battle raging within her. He took one last sip of coffee and rose from his stool. "Get some rest. I'll poke around tomorrow, see if any of my old contacts can help." Sam locked the door behind him and stood for a moment, listening to the wind howl outside. The roadhouse felt emptier than usual, as though anticipating a coming storm. She retreated to her small office, was sitting in the dark for a long while, wrestling with the reality that her quiet life was slipping through her fingers like desert sand. If there was a line between soldier and civilian, it was quickly blurring, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could avoid. Crossing it again, morning arrived with a sharp, cool breeze and a sky streaked with pale pink clouds. Sam woke in her trailer, feeling as though she hadn't slept at all. As she got ready for the day, her mind churned through the events of the previous night. The tension weighed so heavily on her that even the routine act of brewing coffee felt surreal. Stepping outside, she found the desert landscape unusually still. The faint smell of creosote lingered in the air, and distant mountains loomed under the early sun. She drove to the roadhouse, her eyes scanning every side road for a glimpse of motorcycle headlights, though the streets of Willow's End remained relatively quiet. She couldn't shake the feeling that the stone jackal were coiled nearby, ready to strike inside the Thunderbird Roadhouse. Pearl was already bustling about, wiping down tables in preparation for the lunch rush. She wore a forced smile, but Sam could tell something was off. "Morning," Sam greeted, setting her keys on the counter. Pearl nodded, glancing out the window. "Strangest thing happened earlier," she said, lowering her voice. "I saw a couple of those bikers cruising down Main Street. They didn't stop anywhere, just looking around, almost like they were casing the place." Sam's stomach nodded. The gang was aiding their surveillance, presumably checking how the town would react. She thanked Pearl for the heads-up, then said about her chores, though her thoughts were elsewhere. Every clatter of a glass or scrape of a chair made her flinch, ears keyed to the possibility of confrontation. Near midday, Hawk slipped in through the side entrance. He grabbed a seat at the far end of the bar, feigning a casual visitor's demeanor. Sam brought him a soda, and they spoke in hushed tones whenever Pearl was out of earshot. "Any developments?" Sam asked, gripping a coaster so tightly her fingertips turned white. Hawk took a long sip before responding. "A contact of mine used to run security. Consulting around here," he confirmed. "The Stone Jackals have a rep for moving. Contraband, guns, drugs, whatever pays. They are known to set up temporary bases in remote towns and extort local businesses. Then they funnel illegal goods through back roads." He paused, setting the glass down. "They bad news, Sam. The real deal." She swallowed hard, scanning the roadhouse to ensure no one else was listening. "We need a plan," she said simply. Hawk nodded. "I've put out feelers for more help. Don't know if they'll come through, but we can't wait around tonight. I'm heading back to the service station, might place a tracker on any vehicles they leave behind. If we can monitor their movements, we'll know when and where to expect them." Sam considered this, torn between her aversion to further escalation and the stark reality that ignoring the threat would only embolden the bikers. "Let me come with you," she said, voice firm. Hawk met her gaze. "You sure I am?" Sam replied, though her heart pounded at the thought. "We go together that way. We have each other's backs." Hawk didn't argue. He merely gave a short nod of approval as Pearl returned. Sam slid down the bar, resuming her role as the attentive bartender, but her mind churned with a sense of grim determination. She'd never asked for this fight. But it had come to her doorstep regardless, and if the Stone Jackal wanted to bring chaos into Willow's End, they would soon learn they'd pick the wrong quiet bartender to push around. That evening, the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in bands of orange and violet. As Sam locked the roadhouse doors earlier than usual, she left a note for Pearl, stating they would be closed for maintenance the next morning. In truth, she wanted one around who might stumble into danger. Hawk arrived right at closing, dressed in dark, non-reflective clothing. Sam had done the same, opting for black jeans and a hooded jacket. "We'll take my pickup," she said, leading him to the aged but reliable truck parked behind the building. It bore scuffs and DS from years of desert travel, but it was less conspicuous than Hawk's. Borrowed sedan, they tossed their gear onto the bench seat. Binoculars, a small toolbox containing the GPS trackers Hawk had acquired, and a few other essentials in case things went south. Sam also brought her M9 safely holstered at her side. The drive out to the service station was tense and quiet, neither of them eager to break the silence that felt like a shield against the unknown. Stars began to speckle the sky, and the moon, though not full, offered enough pale light to reveal the desert's contours. Sam fought down the memories of past missions that crowded her mind, late-night raids, the hum of helicopter blades, the whispered commands of her team leader. She was in Arizona, not a foreign war zone, she reminded herself, but the stakes felt no less real. They approached the station from the opposite side, this time parking farther away, behind a rise in the terrain. "We walked from here," Hawk murmured, cutting the engine. The two climbed out, the quiet scraping of boots on dirt, sounding unnaturally loud in Sam's ears. A breeze carried the scent of dry sage and dust across the expanse. Their plan was simple. Hawk would plant trackers on any vehicles, while Sam kept watch for patrols or unexpected arrivals. The key was stealth. If they were discovered, they risked a firefight that would alert the entire gang and possibly bring retribution down on Willow's End before they were prepared. Crouching low, they crossed the open ground at a methodical pace. The service station loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the star-flecked sky tonight. However, there was a faint light flickering from within, a sign that some of the bikers might be on site. Sam's pulse quickened, adrenaline flooding her veins. She nodded at Hawk, who returned a reassuring look. Slipping around back, they found two motorcycles parked haphazard near a side entrance, as well as a pickup truck with out-of-state plates. Hawk gripped Sam's shoulder briefly, a silent quee to stand guard before he knelt by the pickup's rear bumper. Carefully, he attached a small magnetized tracker to the undercarriage, then moved to the bikes. Each had a small space behind the engine block where a tracker could be concealed. Sam kept her eyes peeled, scanning the station's rear windows for any sign of movement through the shattered glass. She could make out the dim glow of a single lantern. The murmur of low voices drifted out into the night. Fear coiled in her gut, but she steeled herself, focusing on her breathing to remain calm. Hawk finished his task in minutes, though it felt like hours to Sam just as he was securing the final tracker. A door creaked from within the station. Sam froze, pressing herself against the wall as footsteps approached. If someone stepped outside, now they'd be face to face with intruders. She raised her M9, heart thundering, ready for the worst. Yet, luck or fate was on their side. The footsteps halted, and the door slammed shut again. The voices retreating inside, Hawk signaled Sam with a quick hand motion, and they withdrew into the darkness. Mission accomplished for the moment. But as they carefully made their way back to the truck, Sam knew this was only the beginning. The trackers would help them gather intelligence, but the price of discovery was soaring higher with every risk they took the following morning. Sam and Hawk met at a secluded spot behind the roadhouse, away from prying eyes, with Hawk's phone in hand. They watched the real-time GPS pings from the three trackers he'd successfully planted. Two dots remained stationary near the abandoned service station. Presumably the motorcycles. The third dot, the pickup truck, had moved several miles east before stopping at a location on the outskirts of an even smaller town than Willow's End. Hawk zoomed in on the satellite map. Looks like some kind of ranch property. He murmured, "This could be a stash house or another safe spot they're using." Sam leaned in, a frown etched on her face. "We can't be chasing them all over the desert. If we spread ourselves too thin, we'll lose the advantage of surprise." She gestured to the phone. "Let's keep monitoring for a pattern. See if they make regular supply runs or gather in large numbers somewhere." Hawk nodded. "I'll give it a few days. Track their comings and goings. We need to identify a choke point somewhere we can disrupt their operations without turning the whole region into a battlefield." He glanced around to ensure they were alone, then lowered his voice in, "The meantime, I've got a couple of old friends who might be willing to help off the books. Former military types like us." Sam hesitated, chewing her lip. The notion of calling in more people sent a jolt of guilt through her. She recalled how she'd left that life behind, determined not to drag anyone else into deadly situations. But the stone jackals were no ordinary threat. "And Willow's End deserved a fighting chance if they're trustworthy," she finally said, "and if they can be discreet." Hawk gave a small nod. "They're discreet, all right, but they won't come cheap. And we can't exactly build a town for this." Sam rubbed her forehead. Funding a covert defense force out of her own pocket was daunting, especially since the roadhouse was barely breaking. Even yet, the cost of doing nothing was far steeper. "We'll figure it out," she said quietly. "Maybe some folks in town can chip in if they realize what's at stake." Their conversation was cut short by the sound of approaching voices. Pearl and a few regulars strolled into the roadhouse's back lot, curious about the owner's meeting. Sam and Hawk slipped into casual mode, exchanging small talk, as if they were discussing inventory and repairs. But beneath the pleasantries, tension crackled like an unseen wire. As the day wore on, Sam tried to maintain business as usual. She served drinks, joked lightly with regulars, and even managed a brief smile or two. Yet, every so often, she'd catch Hawk glancing at his phone, checking the trackers each time. Her stomach twisted in anticipation. She imagined the bikers loading weapons or finalizing plans as strong-arm willows and, by late afternoon, a stillness settled over the bar. Sam found a moment to step outside, letting the desert sunlight wash over her. She inhaled deeply, the warm air filling her lungs, and thought about the tipping point. She was fast approaching. The Stone Jackal operation was bigger than she'd initially feared, organized, well-supplied, and relentless. If she didn't act soon, Willow's End would become just another casualty in their criminal expansion. Inside quietly finished a phone call, he offered Sam a meaningful look, one she knew all too well. Reinforcements were on the way, lines were being drawn, and the time for half measures was rapidly slipping away. One thing was certain: the roadhouse would not remain a mere bystander in this unfolding storm. In the week that followed, the unease in Willow's End grew as palpable as the desert heat. News of the Stone Jackal threats continued to spread, and though only a fraction of the townspeople knew the full scope of the gang's operations, nearly everyone sensed a storm brewing. Business owners began shutting their doors earlier, and parents hurried their children home before dusk. A once laid-back community was sliding into collective apprehension, and the tension was visible in the tight-lipped expressions of the locals, who gathered at the roadhouse for her part. Sam juggled two realities: the day-to-day routine of a bartender and the covert planning sessions with Hawk. By daylight, she poured drinks, listened to small-town gossip, and offered calm smiles to patrons who needed reassurance at night. She and Hawk monitored the GPS trackers, mapped out potential Stone Jackal routes, and speculated on the next move the gang might make each time a tracker showed movement toward Willows. In Sam's heart would thump against her ribs each time she'd wait for signs that the bikers might be planning a raid, only to see the signals veer off in another direction. It felt like being haunted by shadows ever-present, but never fully materializing. Meanwhile, Hawk reached out to his old contacts. The calls were and cryptic, often placed from random spots in the desert. To avoid drawing attention, the men he spoke to were mostly veterans, some of them with backgrounds as murky as Hawk's. In Sam's own, they might come, he tells Sam, sounding both hopeful and resigned. If they do, we'll have enough muscle to handle this. But Sam could tell these were not sure bets. Old comrades in arms had their own SCS, and secrets and loyalty could be a complicated currency. The next turning point came on a scorching afternoon when Boyd himself sauntered into the roadhouse with three of his closest thugs. One was the stocky man with the scar across his neck. The other two were newcomers: a lanky blonde with a sneer permanently etched on his face, and a broad-shouldered brute whose knuckles were tattooed with obscene slogans. They commandeered a table near the jukebox, eyeing Sam with a smugness that spoke of impending conquest as she served them drinks. Boyd made no secret of his intentions. "You know, bartender," he drawled, leaning back in his chair with an arrogant stretch. "A place like this could be booming if you'd play ball. I've seen the highways out there, lots of truckers, lots of wanderers. You partner with us, we bring in more customers, everyone wins." His voice was pleasant, almost businesslike, but his eyes gleamed with malice. Sam kept her composure. "Your kind of business isn't welcome here," she said, her tone edged with finality. The tension flared a silent standoff that froze the other patrons in place. After a moment, Boyd merely grinned, a thin, menacing curve of the lips. He gestured to his men, and they filed out without paying for their drinks. Yet as they left, the lanky blonde deliberately knocked a bar stool to the floor, the loud clatter echoing the threat. They didn't bother to voice. Sam's jaw clenched. Each confrontational visit chipped away at Willow's End's sense of safety, and at her own patience that evening. Once the bar had emptied, and Hawk had arrived, they both agreed the time had come for decisive action. Their quiet intelligence-gathering phase was nearing its limit. If they waited any longer, the stone jackal would strike first, and the ensuing damage could devastate the town she had grown to love. 2 days later, reinforcements arrived, but not in the way Sam or Hawk had expected. Just past sundown, Sam was locking up the roadhouse, early to avoid giving the stone jackal an easy target, when 2 motorcycles rumbled into the parking lot. Alarmed, she reached instinctively for the M9 tucked beneath the bar, her heart pounding with the anticipation of yet another confrontation. As the riders cut their engines, Sam noticed something unusual. Neither wore the stone jackal patch. Instead, their leather jackets bore small, subdued patches, reminiscent of military units, though nothing overtly recognizable. One rider pulled off his helmet, revealing a salt-and-pepper beard and a weathered face. The other removed her helmet, revealing short-cropped hair and piercing eyes that scanned the surroundings with professional detachment. Sam hovered by the bar's entrance, ready for trouble, "Some Carter?" the bearded man asked, dismounting. His tone was respectful but firm. Sam gripped her pistol just in case. "Who's asking?" she said cautiously. The woman flashed a faint smile. "Call me Kane," she said, nodding to her partner. "This is Walker. Hawk told us you could use a hand relief," flooded Sam, though she kept her guard raised. Hawk had mentioned reaching out to possible allies, but he hadn't confirmed who might show up. Apparently, these two had answered the call. They carried themselves with the calm confidence of those who'd seen real action, a demeanor Sam recognized all too well. She lowered her pistol, letting them inside over mugs of black coffee. Everyone agreed to stay clear-headed. They discussed the stone jackal and the threat facing Willow's End. Hawk arrived midway through the conversation, clearly surprised but not displeased to find Kane and Walker already there. Hasty introductions were made, and soon the 4 of them were poring over hand-drawn maps and phone-based GPS data, planning how best to counter the gang's growing presence. Walker set his mug down, revealing a prosthetic hand, a relic from some past mission's violence. "No doubt, we've got enough experience between us to handle a mid-size gang," he said, "but we need to be smart. Can't just go in, guns blazing, and expect no collateral damage." Kane chimed in, her eyes flicking to Sam. "We've dealt with biker syndicates before. They thrive on intimidation. Take that away and half their power vanishes. But we also need to cut off their supply lines, isolate them from whatever resources they've stashed in the desert." Sam listened intently. These were the sort of tactical discussions she used to have in briefing rooms thousands of miles away. Not in a dusty Arizona bar, yet she couldn't deny feeling grateful and a little reassured by the presence of skilled allies. She glanced at Hawk, who nodded approvingly. His respect for Khan and Walker evident by the end of the night. They had a skeleton plan. First, isolate the stone jackal by sabotaging their makeshift base at the service station. Next, intercept their supply routes, using the real-time tracker data Hawk had gathered, and finally confront the core leadership Boyd and his lieutenants on turf. The gang didn't control, Sam added one crucial condition. "We do this with minimal risk to the townspeople." she stressed. "If civilians get hurt, this operation fails, no matter how well we take down the gang." Kane and Walker agreed without hesitation. Hawk placed a hand on Sam's shoulder, silently signaling his solidarity. The four of them, UNDOD. This was no simple job. It was a moral imperative, an effort to protect a quiet town that had become home to one of their own. And somewhere in the night, as desert winds howled across the empty roads, Sam felt the stirring of that old warrior spirit. She had tried so hard to bury a few nights later. Sam found herself crouched behind a tumbleweed, choked culvert near the abandoned service station. Hawk was on her left, Kane and Walker on her right. The plan was in motion, quietly. Infiltrate the station, sabotage. The bikers stored supplies and place a few surprises that would make it difficult for the stone jackals to operate under the cover of darkness. They moved with practiced stealth. Walker carried a specialized toolkit for disabling vehicles. Kane had a small stash of homemade incendiary charges designed to destroy ammunition caches without blowing the entire station. Sky-High Hawk was armed with his usual sidearm, and Sam held her M9, each of them wearing earpieces so they could communicate without raising them. Their voices drawing close to the station, they spotted a single motorcycle parked near the main entrance. "Likely a lookout," Hawk whispered, scanning the area with a pair of night vision goggles. Sam tensed, remembering their near-miss encounter a couple of weeks earlier. Yet this time, they had the advantage of numbers and a plan. The group split into pairs. Hawk and A circled around to the back, where they previously noticed a storage room crammed with crates. Kane and Walker slunk toward the front, tasked with taking out the lone sentry if necessary. Every step felt fraught with tension, the desert silence amplifying even the faintest noise. Sam could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. When Sam and Hawk reached the storage room's entrance, a battered metal door, they quickly tested it. Locked. Hawk produced a small pry bar, and in mere seconds they eased the door open with a gentle squeal of metal inside rows of crates. The walls lit by a single flickering bulb dangling from the ceiling. Sam recognized some of the labels from the photos they'd taken before: canned goods, fuel canisters, and boxes marked ammo. Outside, a muffled thud echoed, followed by a brief scuffle. Sam's grip on her pistol tightened through the earpiece. Kane's voice crackled. "Look out. Neutralized. He's out cold. Not dead. We're moving in, Hawk." And Sam exchanged quick nods. They began planting small incendiary charges among the ammo crates. Each device was on a timed fuse set to ignite and destroy the munitions without causing an uncontrolled explosion. Hawk worked with swift precision, occasionally glancing at Sam for confirmation. She assisted by steadying the crates and keeping watch on the entrance, her nerves taut as a drawn bowstring. Meanwhile, Kane and Walker sneaked through the station's main corridor, disabling or sabotaging any vehicles. They found, occasionally, Sam caught fragments of their whispered conversation. Over the earpiece, bikes disabled, or found a stash of rifles, tagging them for destruction. The entire operation took less than 20 minutes. In that brief window, they rendered the Stone Jackal forward base nearly useless. Sam felt a strange sense of exhilaration mixed with dread. She knew the gang would discover their handiwork soon enough, and that would likely escalate the conflict. But giving the Stone Jackal free rein was no longer an option. Just as they finished setting the last charge, Hawk tapped Sam's shoulder. "Time to go," he breathed, his voice low. She nodded. They retreated into the desert night, regrouping with Kane and Walker behind a distant ridge. The moment they were safely away, Hawk pressed a button on his phone. A few seconds later, faint pops and flickers lit the horizon. The Stone Jackal ammunition and supplies were turning to ash. their advantage slipping through their fingers. Sam exhaled a shaky breath, her heart still hammering. This was war, maybe not in an official sense, but certainly in spirit. And the opening salvo had just been fired by the quiet bartender and her team of unlikely allies. Word of the sabotage spread faster than Sam anticipated. By dawn, the local grapevine was abuzz with rumors that an explosion had rocked the abandoned service station. At first, the townspeople were on edge, fearing some deadly accident or terrorist attack. However, as details trickled in, no reported casualties, just destroyed gear. Some dared to hope the stone jackal had finally been dealt a blow. But Sam knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The gang would be furious, and Boy would be doubly determined to extract revenge indeed. Throughout the day, she noticed more biker traffic around Willows in groups of 2 or 3 rode past the roadhouse, glaring through the windows as if deeing Sam to show her face. She stayed mostly indoors, figging a slow business day, while Hawk, Kane, and Walker took turns patrolling the edges of town, armed and ready to respond if anyone tried to retaliate around mid-afternoon. A white pickup truck rumbled into the roadhouse's dirt lot. Sam peered through a gap in the blinds, heart lurching. Boyd stepped out of the passenger side, slamming the door so hard it rattled another biker. Taller, with a shaved head, climbed out of the driver's seat, scanning the surroundings. Neither wore helmets, nor did they bother hiding their stone jackal patches. Sam took a deep breath, recalling the carefully crafted code phrase they had prepared. She lifted her phone and sent a single text. Birds in the barn to Hawk, Kane, and Walker. Instantly she knew they would converge on the roadhouse's perimeter, though it might take them a few minutes to get into position. In that time, Sam would have to stall. She unholstered her M9, checked the safety, then hid it beneath a dish rag on the counter as Boy pushed open the door. Sam forced a casual stance, arms crossed over her chest. The roadhouse was otherwise empty. She'd sent Pearl home early, not wanting any innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. Well, well, Boyd sneered. Stepping inside, heard something interesting happened last night. Fireworks in the desert. The shaved head biker trailed behind him, lips curled in a silent snarl. Sam shrugged. Must have been quite a show. Boyd's eyes flicked around the bar, searching for signs of anything. You wouldn't happen to know who messed with our stuff, would you? A few folks around here seem to think you might. Keeping her face neutral, Sam met his gaze. I don't control rumors, she replied evenly. People say all kinds of things. His smirk twisted into something darker. Let's cut the crap. Bartender, we know you had a hand in it. You and your friend with the fancy tactics. He nodded. To his companion, who stepped forward menacingly, we lost a lot of goods, guns, ammo supplies. You owe us. Tension coiled in the air. Sam could almost sense Hawk, Kane, and Walker positioning themselves outside. She just needed to draw this out a bit longer. Hey you, she said, fighting confusion. I don't recall ever borrowing anything from you. Boyd slammed his fist on a nearby table, rattling glasses. Don't play dumb with me, he roared. You think you can hide behind that quiet little bartender act forever. We know your type. Ex-military, tough as nails. Well, guess what? We're not backing down. We'll own this town one way or another. Sam felt her pulse spike. She slid a hand toward the hidden M9, her mind cycling through possible moves. Any second now, Hawk and the others would make their entrance. She just hoped they weren't too late. Before Sam could respond, the door swung open, flooding the roadhouse with daylight. Instead, Kane and Walker, each moving with casual but lethal poise, Hawk appeared a heartbeat later at a side entrance, effectively boxing Boyd and his associate in the tension shot. Up another notch, and Sam saw the shaved head. Biker's eyes widen in surprise as he realized they were outnumbered. "Afternoon, gentlemen," C said, her voice cool enough to freeze water. She rested a hand on her hip, her jacket parted just enough to reveal a holstered pistol. Walker, towering at her side, crossed his arms, the subtle shift in his stance, letting everyone know he was more than willing to get physical if needed. Hawk glanced at Sam and gave a near imperceptible nod. She exhaled. Relief. Her backup head arrived, keeping her M9 concealed. Sam addressed Boyd, maintaining an icy calm. "You seem to have worn out your welcome," she stated. "Might be time for you to go." The shaved head. Biker looked ready to lunge, but Boyd raised a hand. Still reeling from the sudden shift in power dynamics, he eyed the three newcomers, sizing them up with a scowl. "So this is your little army, huh, Bartender?" he sneered. "A washed-up sniper. A couple of mercenaries, and you. I've seen how you operate," Sam said, intimidating towns. "Extorting honest people, threatening me." "That all ends here." Boyd let out a harsh laugh, though it wavered with uncertainty. "Or what, you'll shoot us down in broad daylight." "The cops would love that." Hawk stepped forward, pulling his badge, the one he had earned for private security. Contracting out of his jacket, though not an official law enforcement badge, it was enough to "so doubt we have evidence of your illegal activities," Hawk lied smoothly, "including your stash at that service station. I'm sure the authorities would be interested in hearing about your involvement with arms trafficking." Sam fought to keep her composure, grateful for Hawk's quick thinking. There wasn't actually a direct link to law enforcement yet, but Boyd didn't know that. The shaved-head biker hesitated, glancing nervously at Boyd. Sam could almost see the gears turning in their heads. If these people had the means and the proof, a confrontation could spell the end of the Stone Jackals, either behind bars or in a hail of bullets. Boyd's bravado faltered for the briefest moment. "You think you've won something here," he snarled, trying to regain control. "We've got a whole crew out there, and they're not going to sit back and let this slide." "We know about your crew," Kane interjected, her voice dripping with scorn. "From your storage facility in the desert to that ranch property east of here, you're running out of hiding spots." She tapped over your phone as though displaying incriminating footage. "Next time, maybe we'll show up with actual law enforcement." An uneasy silence spread thick with the possibility of sudden violence. Boyd looked around clearly. Cal CCUL aiding the odds. Finally, he let out a frustrated growl, nodding sharply to his partner. "We're leaving," he said, turning for the door. "But don't think this is over. You've just declared war." The pair backed out of the roadhouse, maintaining eye contact until they reached their truck. Moments later, the engine roared to life, and they tore out of the lot, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Sam's legs felt suddenly weak, but she forced herself to stand tall. Kane locked the door behind them. Walk let out a breath he'd been holding. Hawk slid his badge back into his pocket, lips pressed in a grim line. Sam swallowed hard. "War," she whispered, echoing Boyd's parting threat outside the wind, howled as if echoing the promise of an impending clash that could tear Willow's End apart after Boyd's ominous exit. The four of them gathered in Sam's small office behind the bar. The space was cramped, lined with extra bottles of liquor and a battered filing cabinet, but it offered relative privacy. Once the door was shut, they exchanged uneasy glances, the severity of the situation settling on them like a weight. "So now they know we're not pushovers." Walker began leaning against the wall. "But that also means they'll bring everything they've got." C nodded in agreement. "Their next move could be immediate. We should be prepared for a rapid escalation." Hawk tapped a dusty folder on Sam's desk. It contained printed maps of Willow's End along with notes about the Jackal possible safe houses and known routes. "We need to lock this town down," he said. "Coordinate with anyone who's willing to help without scaring them off. We can't do this alone, even with 4 of us." Sam inhaled, trying to quell the racing of her heart. She'd never wanted to involve innocent civilians, but Willow's End wasn't just any place. These were people she cared about. Pearl, Old Man Fletcher, the ranchers and mechanics who depended on the roadhouse as a gathering spot. If the Stone Jackals launched a full-scale assault, the entire town would be at risk. "We should talk to the mayor," she suggested. Though she knew Willow's End didn't have much of a formal government, more like a part-time mayor in a small council that met sporadically. Hawk nodded. "Good idea. If we can at least get the locals to organize some sort of watch, it'll help. Even if they're not fighters, they can alert us to any biker movement and keep themselves safe. We could also consider a checkpoint on the main road." Kane added something low-key, manned by volunteers, just to spot suspicious traffic. Walker crossed his arms. "That's going to require a lot of trust. Most of these folks don't know us from Adam. We'll need Sam to vouch for us." Sam sighed, a knot tightening in her chest. "I'll do what I can, but I can't force them. And if they know the Stone Jackal are targeting me specifically, they might be reluctant to join in." "Just be honest," Hawk advised, giving her a reassuring look. "Let them know the threat is real, and that if we stand together, we stand a better chance." They hashed out the details of their plan. Sam would speak with local leaders and business owners, quietly arranging a volunteer watch. Kane and Walker would continue scouting the highways, using the tracker data to anticipate any large biker gatherings. Hawk would fortify the roadhouse and key points around town with basic defensive measures, reinforce forked doors, hidden cameras, even sandbag placements if time permitted. Before dispersing, they stood in a tight circle, each silently acknowledging the gravity of what lay ahead. Sam felt a wave of guilt crash over her. This was exactly the kind of conflict she had wanted to escape when she left Delta Force. Yet, here she was, orchestrating a community's defense, a part of her longed to run, to disappear again, but the faces of Willows and inhabitants were etched in her mind. "We've got this," Kane said softly, almost as if reading Sam's thoughts. She placed a firm hand on Sam's shoulder. Walker nodded in silent agreement, and Hawk offered a small, reassuring smile. Despite the looming danger, Sam felt bolstered by their presence. If war was coming, they would meet it head-on and do their damnedest to protect the innocent lives caught in the crossfire. Convincing the townspeople to stand united proved both easier and harder than Sam had anticipated. She spent the next morning visiting the modest town hall where Mayor Gertrude Hulam, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a steely backbone, listened gravely to Sam's account of the Stone Jackal's aggression. The mayor had heard rumors, of course, but hearing the details directly from Sam, who had thwarted Boyd's intimidation attempts, brought the threat into sharp focus. "Lord have mercy," Mayor Holcomb said, pressing a hand to her chest. "I knew those bikers weren't here for any good reason, but arms trafficking, extortion." Her eyes flitted around as though expecting mass criminals to burst in at any moment. "What do we do?" "Miss Carter," Sam, still feeling odd about using her last name in town. Most folks only knew her as Sam. The bartender explained the plan. She spoke calmly but urgently. A volunteer watch, secure communication channels, and an understanding that if the biker showed up in force, everyone should either stay locked indoors or retreat to safer ground. She also suggested that any able-bodied resident with prior law enforcement or military experience might quietly coordinate with Hawk and the others. To Sam's relief, the mayor didn't scoff or trivialize the warnings. Instead, Mayor Hulam summoned the informal town council, comprising half a dozen elders who ran local businesses in public services. By noon, They convened in the wooden floor, meeting hall, the walls lined with faded black and white photographs of Willow's End's frontier. Past Pearl was there representing the cafe, along with Dalton the mechanic and a few ranchers. Sam laid out the situation plainly. "It's not just about me," Sam emphasized, scanning their anxious faces. "These people want to control Willow's End and they're willing to use violence. We can't stand by and hope they move on." Pearl's voice trembled as she spoke. What if we just pay them off? Sometimes gangs just want money. Maybe they'll leave if they get what they want." Several heads turned toward Sam. She inhaled, "That might buy time, but it won't solve the problem. It tells them we're easy targets. They'll come back for more. Trust me, I've seen it happen elsewhere." Dalton, arms folded, let out a gruff sigh. "So what's the alternative? Turn ourselves into an armed camp at that?" Sam glanced out the window where a lone tumbleweed drifted across Main Street. She pictured the roadhouse with its squeaky doors and neon sign suddenly bristling with fortifications, barbed wire sandbags, watchers armed with rifles. The image felt surreal, but ironically less jarring than letting the stone jackals walk all over them. "If we do nothing, we're handing them the keys to the town," she said. "We have friends, capable friends who will help, but we need everyone to do their part too, even if it's just reporting suspicious activity." After a tense silence, Mayor Holcomb stood leaning on her cane. "I, for one, will not be bullied out of my home," she stated firmly. The others murmured in agreement. Some with more conviction than others. Plans were made. Phone trees for alerts. A rotating schedule for volunteers to keep an eye on the roads, and a locked storage room at Dalton's garage where they could stash extra supplies and first aid. Stepping out of the meeting hall, Sam felt both booed by their solidarity and weighed down by the knowledge that their fragile unity would be tested by an enemy that specialized in chaos still. If there was any chance of saving Willow's End, this was it. A community standing side by side, ready to protect each other. In that resolve, Sam found a renewed sense of purpose, one that called on every skill and lesson from her past life. While Willowen prepared its patchwork defenses, Hawk, Kane, and Walker focused on further crippling the stone jackal operations. The trackers they had planted continued to yield valuable data on the gang's movements. A pattern emerged. Small squads of bikers regularly ventured from the service HYN ruins, what remained of it, to scattered hideouts on the outskirts of neighboring counties. Whether these were purely for storage or if they hosted active members was unclear, but the repeated routes painted a clear picture of the gang's logistical network. It was a hot, still evening when the four conspirators convened at Sam's trailer instead of the roadhouse. The modest single-wide structure offered little space, but it was less obvious as a meeting point. The stifling desert air clung to them as they huddled over a laptop on Sam's rickety kitchen table, analyzing the blinking dots of the GPS feed. "There," Khan said, pointing at one of the routes they passed, "that same junction every 2 nights, right before midnight, probably heading to the ranch we identified earlier." Hawk nodded. "If we intercept them there, we cut off their supply chain, might force them into an open confrontation, or at least starve them of resources." Walker leaned in, arms braced on the table. "We need to be sure we can handle the fallout. If we ambush them, they'll strike back hard. Are we ready for that?" Sam exhaled, glancing out the small window at the dim silhouette of cacti under a waxing moon. "We're getting there. The town's on alert. The volunteer watch is in place, and Dalton's got some basic barricades he can deploy if the bikers try a mass invasion." She paused, lips pressed tightly. "But if we leave them alone, they'll pick us apart eventually." Kane nodded in agreement. "Then, let's plan the ambush. Carefully. We can't just roll up and start shooting. If we can stop their vehicles, confiscate or destroy their supplies and get out. That might be enough to push them into retreat. In the cramped space, a rough strategy took shape. They would set up a blockade on the remote junction where the stone jackal frequently traveled, using spike strips and a stolen road sign warning of a detour. They'd funnel the bikers into a narrow path. Once there, Hawk and Walker would disable their vehicles while Sam and Kane provided cover. The goal was to do it swiftly, seizing any weapons or contraband, then disappear before reinforcements could arrive. It was a high-stakes gamble. One misstep, and they could end up outgunned or pinned down in the open desert. Yet the alternative waiting for the stone jackal to tighten their grip seemed worse. Sam found herself staring at her own reflection in the laptop screen, glimpsing the hardened eyes of a soldier she once was. She told herself she'd never do this again, never orchestrate an operation that could end in lethal force. But the stone jackal had forced her hand late into the night. They fine-tuned the details, marking maps, and triple-checking each roll. Walker would handle the spike strips. Thanks to his mechanical know-how, Kane would set up a vantage point with a scoped rifle, ensuring they maintained overwatch. Hawk and Sam would stand by the blockade, prepared to confront the bikers head-on if necessary. When they finally wrapped up, exhaustion weighed on them like a heavy blanket. Hawk squeezed Sam's shoulder reassuringly, Kane offered a tight-lipped nod, and Walker gave a silent thumbs up. One by one, they left, vanishing into the desert night alone in her trailer. Sam tried to sleep, but found no rest. The upcoming ambush loomed in her thoughts, an imminent test of courage and skill that would determine whether Willow's End had a future or whether the stone jackals would claim it as their own. The night of the planned ambush arrived, with the kind of clear sky that made the desert almost luminescent under the starlight. Sam and her allies spent the day making final preparations, each grappling with the weight of what was to come. By 1100ers, they were in position at the chosen junction, a lonely stretch of cracked asphalt that cut through miles of scrubland and rocky outcrops. Walker had placed a road closed sign ahead of the junction, redirecting any traffic down a narrow dirt path. Just beyond that point, he laid out spike strips, concealed under a thin layer of dirt. Kane lay prone on a small ridge about 200 yards away. Her scoped rifle trained on the intersection. Hawk and Sam waited beside their vehicles, hidden behind a cluster of boulders with a clear line of sight. To the road, time crawled. The desert night was deceptively serene. A light breeze rustled the mesquite shrubs, and distant coyotes howled at the moon. Sam's hands felt slick with sweat. Despite the cool air, she double-checked her M9, then looked to Hawk, who offered her a curt nod of reassurance. This was it, the moment they'd been planning for days. Shortly after midnight, the faint sound of motorcycle engines echoed across the stillness. Sam tensed, heart-thawing through the binoculars. She spotted two bikes in a pickup truck following behind. The lead motorcycle slowed at the road, closed sign, then turned onto the dirt path as intended. The second bike followed suit. The truck rumbled after them. Within seconds, the first bike struck the spike strips. Tires hissed and shredded, sending the rider skidding sideways with a startled yell. The second biker veered to avoid the same fate, but Walker triggered a backup strip that snagged his rear wheel. The pickup driver, realizing too late that this was a trap, slammed on the brake, but not before ripping his front tires to ribbons. Chaos erupted in the moonlit desert. The bikers cursed, stumbling off their disabled rides. One leveled a pistol in the general direction of the hidden ambushers. Kane's rifle cracked once, and the shot ricocheted off the asphalt near his feet, a deliberate warning rather than a kill shot. Hawk and Sam sprang into action, emerging with weapons drawn. "Hands up!" Hawk shouted, his voice cutting through the night. The first biker scrambled for cover behind the felled motorcycle, while the truck driver hurled open his door, brandishing a shotgun. Sam dropped into a crouch and fired a warning shot that blasted gravel near his boots. "Drop it!" she yelled, adrenaline spiking as she lined up her sights. The driver hesitated, shotgun wavering before he could decide. Another crack from Kane's overwatch sent a bullet whizzing past his ear. He cursed and tossed the weapon aside, dropping to his knees. Meanwhile, Walker moved in swiftly, sidearm at the ready. The second biker tried to flee, but tripped over the spike strips and crashed face first into the dirt. Walker disarmed him, kicking a revolver out of reach. In less than a minute, the three Stone Jackal found themselves disarmed and outmaneuvered. Sam's heart pounded as she and Hawk secured the scene, keeping their weapons trained on the furious but helpless gang members. She felt no triumph, only grim resolve. This was a necessary step, cutting off the gang's supply line, but it also meant they'd drawn blood in this silent war, even if no one lay dead. And Sam knew that once Boyd learned of this humiliating ambush, retaliation would be swift and brutal. Under the pale moonlight, the aftermath of the ambush was both tense and surreal. The three subdued Stone Jackal knelt in a row near their disabled vehicle's hands. On their heads, Hawk kept a watchful eye on them, his demeanor calm yet crackling with authority. Walker was already moving to search the trucks for contraband, rifling through toolboxes, tearing open crates in the bed, and swearing softly each time he found ammo or sealed packages of unknown substances. Sam inhaled, trying to steady her breathing. She stepped closer to the captured bikers. "You all right?" she asked quietly, even though she knew none of them were in a talking mood. One of the bikers glared daggers at her, a trickle of blood running from a scrape on his forehead. Another spat on the ground, the driver of the pickup face. Ashen stared wordlessly at the desert floor. None of them answered. Kane descended the Ridge rifle slung over her shoulder. She scanned the prisoners, then locked eyes with Hawk. "Got them covered?" she asked. He nodded. They had planned for this outcome, but not in a detailed step-by-step manner. Were they to tie these men up and deliver them to law enforcement, the local sheriff was miles away, and the evidence, while incriminating, was gathered under questionably legal means. Sam felt a pang of uncertainty gnawing at her. "Maybe we call the county sheriff," she proposed, even though she doubted the slow-moving bureaucracy would jump at an after-midnight call about an armed ambush. Hawk pressed his lips together. "Considering we do that, we risk the Stone Jackal finding out we're working with the authorities, might paint a target on the sheriff's back, and they could blame the whole town." Walker emerged from the back of the truck, tossing out a duffel bag stuffed with sealed plastic packets. "Drugs," he muttered, voice dripping with disgust. He reached in again and pulled out a small wooden crate that clanked ominously. "Ammo, high caliber." Kane glanced at Sam. "Looks like we just hit the motherlode of their supply run. If we hand this over to the sheriff, at least we'll have proof of major criminal activity. Something to keep them locked up." She gestured to the kneeling bikers. "These guys aren't just a nuisance. They're trafficking arms and narcotics across state lines." Sam's gaze flicked between her allies and the captured Stone Jackal. With every second that passed, the odds of more gang members stumbling upon the scene rose. That happened. A firefight was almost guaranteed. "All right," she said, grimacing. "We'll call the sheriff. They might not arrive quickly, but we can hold these three until they do. Maybe we can get them to talk before then." Hawk nodded in agreement, pulling out a phone as he began. De-sming Walker set about zip-tying the bikers' hands behind their backs. None of them bothered resisting at this point, though their eyes burned with hatred. Sam could almost feel the malice radiating from them, a promise of retribution for being humiliated by a small group of ex-military nobodies. While Hawk talked in hushed tones, C moved to stand beside Sam. "They're going to strike back hard," Kane murmured, lips set in a thin line. "Taking out these supplies won't just piss them off. It'll force their hand." Sam's fingers tightened around the grip of her M9. "I know," she replied, her voice subdued, "but we couldn't let them keep funneling this stuff around. Not when it could hurt more people. We had to cut off their resources." Can's nod was solemn. "Just be ready. This might be the calm before the real storm." Under the starry sky, with the pungent odor of gasoline and hot metal hanging in the air, Sam felt the weight of that truth sink in. They had scored a victory, but in doing so they might have lit the fuse on a powder keg that could blow Willow's End apart. When the county sheriff finally arrived, the horizon was already turning a soft shade of gray, hinting at the coming dawn. A pair of dusty patrol cars rolled up, lights off, and two weary-looking deputies stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. They seemed equal parts surprised and skeptical at the sight: three hog-tied bikers, a damaged pickup truck loaded with contraband, and four civilians who clearly weren't ordinary ranchers or truckers. Hawk took the lead in explaining. Introducing himself as a security consultant and showing a few credentials he still carried, he spun a careful narrative that emphasized they had stumbled upon an illegal trafficking operation. Conveniently omitting the spike strips in premeditated nature of the ambush, the deputies exchanged wary glances, possibly suspecting a larger story. But the evidence before them was enough to warrant IMED immediate action, while the officers radioed in for backup and took statements. Sam stood off to the side with Kanan Walker hearts pounding from the night's adrenaline. She kept stealing glances at the captured stone jackal, who glowered at the deputies with undisguised contempt. One of the bikers finally broke his silence when a deputy tried to read him. "His rights, you're all dead," he snarled, eyes darting towards Sam and her allies. "Boyd will bury this town." A chill ran down Sam's spine. Despite the warmth of the desert morning, she knew the man's words weren't idle threats. The stone jackal had just been dealt a stinging blow, and their retaliation would likely be swift and brutal. She half expected a posy of bikers to appear on the horizon at any moment, roaring in to rescue their comrades, but aside from the occasional coyote yipping in the distance, the dawn remained eerily peaceful. If eventually a more senior deputy arrived, an older man with a tired face, who introduced himself as Deputy Vow. He questions Sam and Hawk for a good hour, pressing for details about how they happened to come across the bikers. Hawk stuck to a script describing how they'd been following up on rumors of stolen property in the area. Vayu didn't seem wholly convinced. "But the contraband in the truck was indisputable, all right," he said, finally rubbing his temples. "We'll book these three for illegal possession of firearms, narcotics, trafficking. Maybe a few more charges if we can make them stick. But you folks need to be careful. Their gang is known for violent reprisals." His eyes flicked to Sam. "Might be best if you leave town for a while." Sam felt her stomach knot. "I appreciate your concern, Deputy, but this is my home. I'm not running." Vayu sighed. "Suit yourself. But don't expect a big presence from us. We're stretched thin and bigger towns are higher on our priority list." "I'll do what I can, but you should keep your guard up," as the deputy car pulled away with the arrested bikers in the back seat. Sam watched the dust settle on the deserted road. The sense of relief she'd hoped for never came. Instead, a grim anticipation coiled in her gut. The stone jackal might have lost a shipment in 3 of men, but that would only spur them to strike back harder. Kane stepped up beside her, hand resting lightly on Sam's shoulder. "We did good here," she said softly, "but it's not over." Sam nodded, eyes fixed on the empty desert. "No," she agreed in a hushed tone, "it's just beginning." True to Deputy Vaughn's warning, law enforcement support in Willow's End remained minimal. The town's remoteness combined with limited manpower meant that even the dramatic bust on the Stone Jackal's contraband did little to change the status quo. If anything, it drew attention to the vulnerability of the region. A spotlight the bikers might exploit in the days that followed. Sam and allies reinforced their defenses. The roadhouse underwent a quiet transformation. Hawk installed better locks and replaced the flimsy wooden rear door with a reinforced metal one. Walker rigged up a basic security system with motion sensor lights in a handful of concealed cameras, their feeds accessible via a laptop in Sam's office. Kane worked with the volunteer watchers, training them in basic observation tactics, how to identify suspicious vehicles, when to call for backup, and how to take a note of license plates without confronting the drivers. The townspeople played their part too under Mayor Hull's direction. Some of the ranchers erected a makeshift barricade on the far side of town, just enough to slow down any large-scale incursion. Pearl and Dalton spread word through the cafe and the garage, urging locals to stay vigilant, lock their doors, and keep a phone close at hand. The result was a cautious but strangely unifying atmosphere, with neighbors checking in on each other more often than before. Yet Sam felt the tension building every time she opened the roadhouse for business. Although the Stone Jackal had been conspicuously absent since the ambush, they lingered like a thunderhead on the horizon, a looming threat that could break at any moment. Each time a motorcycle engine rumbled in the distance, her heart jumped. Sometimes it was just a lone traveler passing through. Other times she spotted 2 or 3 bikers riding at the edge of town, never venturing in. It felt like a twisted game of cat and mouse, both sides wary, both sides waiting. One late afternoon, as she was wiping down the bar, a figure appeared at the entrance. Sam's first instinct was to tense, but her muscles relaxed a fraction when she recognized him. A middle-aged rancher named Cooper, known for his quiet demeanor, in the wide-brimmed hat he rarely took off. He ordered a soda, eyes darting nervously around. After a few sips, he leaned in. "Miss Sam, I saw something near my property line last night." He confided voice, barely above a whisper. Looked like a group of bikers were camping out by the old windmill. One of them had a rifle. Sam's stomach flipped. The windmill was a mile outside the main cluster of Willow's End on land that had been abandoned for years. If the Stone Jackals were staging there, it could be a prelude to an attack. "Did you tell the mayor?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. Cooper nodded. "She told me to let you know too. Figured you'd, pass it on to whoever's handling the, He gestured vaguely, implying the town's informal defense network. Sam forced a reassuring smile. "Thanks, we'll check it out." Inside her thoughts, whirled the Stone Jackal were still out there, likely regrouping. She waited until Cooper left, then locked the doors and placed a call to Hawk. Within minutes, Kane, Walker, and Hawk convened at the Roadhouse house. They decided to run a covert reconnaissance that evening. No direct confrontation, just a look at the bikers' numbers and armaments as night fell. Sam readied her gear with a sense of grim determination. The roadhouse might be fortified, but if the Stone Jackals were gathering near Willow's End in force, it was only a matter of time before the storm broke, and when it did, she intended to meet it head-on, ensuring that these ruthless invaders would regret ever underestimating the quiet bartender of Thunderbird Roadhouse. When the moon rose over the desert that night, Sam found herself once again on the move. With her small band of allies, they ditched their vehicles far from Cooper's ranch, proceeding on foot, under the cover of darkness to avoid alerting any lookouts. The terrain was uneven, a patchwork of scraggly bushes and dry creek beds, but the 4 moved with the disciplined stealth of seasoned operatives as they approached the old windmill, a rusted relic that creaked forlornly whenever the night breeze caught its battered blades They observed faint lights flickering in the distance through her night vision scope. Khan counted 6 bikers around a small campfire. Their motorcycles parked in a semicircle, a pair of rifles leaned against a makeshift tent, and a cooler stood nearby. Hawk signaled for them to hunker down behind a ridge, just out of earshot. There, they whispered their observations. 6 confirmed, Kane said quietly, passing her scope to Sam. Possibility of more, out on patrol. 2 rifles, at least, didn't see any heavy artillery. Sam peered through the scope, her stomach nodding as she recognized one of the gang members, an enforcer named Ripper, notorious for his violent streak. She'd seen him with Boy once bullying an older couple on the edge of town. If he was here, it meant serious business. Walker pointed to a battered van parked just behind the windmill. That's new, he noted. Could be a supply vehicle or a makeshift command post. Hawk nodded grimly. They're setting up forward positions, probably scoping the town for vulnerabilities. This could be the vanguard of a larger force. Sam felt a surge of protectiveness for Willows. And we can't let them dig in here, she hissed, though she knew a full frontal assault risked casualties on both sides and would surely tip off the rest of the Stone Jackal to launch a retaliatory strike on the town. But we need to know if there are more in the area. If we spook these 6, it'll warn the others. Kane weighed the options. We could do a quick sabotage run like before and destroy their vehicles or supplies, but that might provoke an immediate response. Hawk exhaled tension evident in his face. We're running out of time each day. They're free to move around. Here is another day. They solidify their position. We can't leave them unchallenged. Eventually, they settled on a compromise, gather additional intel tonight, then return with a DCIV plan at dawn, if it looked like the Stone Jackal were preparing to assault Willow's End. Sam and her team would strike first. If not, they might have a small window to coordinate with the volunteer watchers, setting a trap for the bikers that wouldn't risk too many civilian lives. They stayed in place for another hour, recording details, license plates, the approximate amount of gear. The times the bikers rotated watch shifts, Sam's heart hammered each time one of the Stone Jackless glanced in their direction, but the darkness in their elevated vantage point kept them concealed. At one point, a biker walked away from the campfire to relieve himself, strolling dangerously close to their ridge. Sam froze, hand on her pistol, scarcely breathing, until he wandered back to the circle of light when they finally withdrew. Slipping away into the star-laden sky, Sam couldn't shake the sense that battle was inevitable. The Stone Jackal had come too far to retreat, empty-handed, with the roadhouse in the town's future hanging in the balance. Sam felt a grim clarity settle over her. If a showdown was coming, she would do whatever it took to ensure Willow's End emerge from this nightmare intact, no matter the personal cost. At first light, Sam and her allies huddled in the roadhouse's back office, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows on the wall's dust. Mose danced in the beam of light, adding to the tense atmosphere. The reconnaissance near Cooper's ranch had confirmed the Stone Jackal were poised for a potentially devastating move. Now they needed a strategy that would keep the town safe while neutralizing the bikers' threat, once and for all. Sam pulled out a large sheet of paper, a map of Willow's End and its surrounding areas painstakingly annotated with every detail they had gathered. Roads, trails, vantage points, and potential chokeholds. They've got at least 6 men camp near the windmill. Could be more on the way. She began circling the location in red marker. We can't let them converge on the town if they coordinate with other gangs from the south. We'll be outnumbered. Kane nodded, tapping a spot on the map. We can cut them off here near the dry riverbed before they reach the main road. We plant charges to block the path, force them into a narrow corridor. Walker scratched his chin, and then we either capture them or force them to retreat. But you can bet they'll call for reinforcements at the first sign of trouble. Hawk leaned forward. Gaze steady. We'll need multiple layers of defense. Our volunteer watch can hold down the town center. Alert us if any other bikers approach from a different angle. Meanwhile, we'll lay the trap near the windmill. If the stone jackals try to push through, we hit them hard. A hush settled over the group as they realized the magnitude of the operation. This wasn't just a small ambush or sabotage mission. It was effectively a battlefield scenario spread across an entire region. Sam's mind flicked to the town's people, the ranchers, cafe workers, retirees, who had never asked for any of this. She had to protect them. "All right," she said, steeling her voice. "Let's break it down, Kane. You take overwatch from the ridge again. Walker, you set the charges to block the exit route. Hawk and I will position ourselves closer to the windmill, drawing the bikers' attention. If they try to mount up, once we know they're committed, we close the trap." Kane's brow furrowed. "That's high risk. If the bikers sense something's off, they could scatter and regroup. Or worse, they might bypass us entirely and head straight into town." Sam nodded grimly. "We'll have to coordinate with the volunteer watchers to cover any secondary roads. We can't seal off every path, but we can at least slow them down and buy time for the rest of us to respond." They spent the next hour fine-tuning details, radio frequencies, fallback points, the exact placement of homemade barriers. By the time they finished, the sun was fully risen, and the roadhouse was quietly opening for the day. Pearl arrived, noting the serious expressions on their faces, but wisely choosing not to ask questions. Sam followed Kane, Walker, and Hawk out to the parking lot, each of them heading off to prepare in their respective roles. The day would be spent gathering the necessary materials, explosives, reinforced barricades, and enough supplies for a potential siege. As they parted way, Sam caught Hawk's arm. "Be careful," she said softly, meeting his eyes. Hawk gently squeezed her hand in response. "You too," he replied. Then he slipped into his vehicle engine, rumbling, leaving Sam standing under the harsh desert sun. She stared at the vacant horizon, heart heavy with the knowledge that come dusk, Willow's zen would either break the stone jackal's hold or be swallowed by it. Dusk settled over Willow's End like a cloak of anticipation. By the time the last rays of sunlight vanished behind the distant mesas, the makeshift defenses were in place. Volunteers manned key junctions leading into town, armed mostly with radios and a few rifles said from ranch closets. The roadhouse stood quietly at the center of it all. Lights dimmed to avoid drawing unnecessary attention on the outskirts. Sam, Hawk, Kane, and Walker took their positions for the final showdown. Kane lay prone on the ridge overlooking the abandoned windmill, her scoped rifle scanning for any sign of movement. Walker crouched behind a rocky outcrop near the dry riverbed, ready to detonate charges that would collapse part of the bank. Blocking the path, Hawk and Sam crept closer to the windmill itself, setting up behind a rusted tractor for cover. Their radios crackled softly, with occasional updates from the volunteer. Watchers, for a long time, there was only silence. Sam's nerves hummed like a live wire. She kept her M9 close, her thoughts flitting between the carefully laid plan and the countless ways it could go wrong. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught Hawk's reassuring nod, and she managed a tight smile in return. Suddenly, movement at the windmill. The faint glow of flashlights and the murmur of voices. Sam peered through her binoculars. Half a dozen bikers again, but this time sporting more gear, possibly extra men hidden in the shadows. One pulled out a phone, gesturing angrily. Another started up a motorcycle, revving the engine in frustration. Kun's voice came through the radio in a low whisper. They seem agitated, might be waiting for more. Sam swallowed hard. Steady, she whispered back. We let them make the first move. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. Then headlights appeared in the distance, a small convoy approaching from a side road. Sam's stomach twisted. This had to be the reinforcements. A black SUV led the way, followed by 3 more motorcycles. The group halted near the wind in him, in dust clouds drifting in the dull moonlight. A tall figure climbed out of the SUV. Even from a distance, Sam recognized him. Boyd, the stone jackal ringleader in Willows. And her pulse hammered. This was it, the confrontation they'd been dreading. Boyd barked orders, pointing at the windmill, and then in the direction of town. The bikers scrambled helmets, clutched weapons, checked. Kane's whisper broke the tense hush. At least 10, now, maybe more. The vehicles, they're gearing up. Walker's voice followed gruff with tension. Sam, if they roll toward the town. Do I blow the charges? Sam's mind raced, triggering the collapse too early. Might scatter them or cause a wild firefight. Wait too long, and the bikers could reach Willow's End. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. Wait until they're committed on the route, she ordered. We want them isolated, not panicked. Within moments, the bikers mounted up. Engines roared, headlights cutting through the dark. The convoy began to move, Boyd's SUV at the lead, as they drew closer to the choke point near the riverbed. Hawk checked his weapon, giving Sam a final look of resolve. She nodded, heart-pounding adrenaline pumping through her veins. Kane, cover us from the ridge, she said into the radio. Walker, get ready. She and Hawk slipped out from behind the tractor, taking up a new vantage behind a boulder. The strategy was clear: block the path. Force the stone jackal to dismount, then engage with precise, overwhelming force. This was the line they had drawn in the sand. A standoff that would decide Willow's End's fate. Above them, the stars shimmered in a pristine desert sky. Sam's breath caught for a moment, the eerie beauty clashing with the imminent violence. Then the thunder of approaching engines grew deafening, and the final battle began. The lead motorcycle was the first to reach the hidden charges Walker's had placed as its wheels touched the edge of the dry riverbed. Walker triggered the remote. A deafening boom shattered the stillness, and a section of the bank collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris. The biker swerved wildly, trying to keep control, but the front tire sank into loose gravel. He tumbled off, rolling painfully to a stop. Instantly, the rest of the convoy screeched to a halt. Engines revving in confusion, Boyd's SUV fishtailed nearly. Rear-ending a motorcycle, shouts and caress filled the air as the stone jackal realized they were caught in an ambush. Flashlights danced wildly, searching for the hidden threat. Kane's rifle barked from the ridge, a controlled shot striking the ground near the SUV's front tire. Another warning rather than a kill-shot. Hawk and Sam opened fire on the rear flank, targeting the bikers who tried to maneuver around the blocked route. Gunfire lit up the darkness like a twisted fireworks display. Some of the stone jackals sought cover behind their vehicles. One fired blindly into the ridge, trying to suppress Kane's vantage. Another turned his weapon toward Hawk's muzzle flash. Hawk ducked behind the boulder, returning bursts of fire with measured precision. Sam crouched low, felt the recoil of her M9 jolt her entire body. Years of training took over control. The breath-aim fire in short sequences moved to new cover in the chaos. Walker stayed low, circling to the flank. He lobbed a smoke grenade near the SUV. The thick plume engulfing Boyd's position disoriented. Bikers coughed and stumbled out of the cloud, leaving them exposed to Kane's watchful scope. One dropped his weapon in panic, yelling at his companions to fall back amid the cacophony. Sam caught sight of Boyd. Himself, he emerged from the drifting smoke rifle in hand, scanning for the source of the ambush. Even at a distance, she recognized the fury etched on his face. He unleashed a volley of bullets toward Hawk's cover, forcing him to duck. Then, spotting Sam's silhouette, Boyd pivoted and fired in her direction. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off the boulder. Sam pressed herself flat, adrenaline roaring in her ears. She peeked out, returning fire, forcing Boyd to dodge behind the SUV in the brief lull. Sam heard something that sent a chill down her spine. A distant roar of more motorcycle engines coming from the south. Reinforcements, the Stone Jackal were throwing everything they had into the showdown. If they managed to flank the defenders, Willow's Z was in grave danger. "Kane, do you see them?" Sam shouted into the radio over the den. "Affirmative," came the reply, tight with urgency. "At least 4 more bikes approaching fast." "I'll try to slow them down." Above, muzzle flashes lit the ridge as C redirected her fire. Sam's mind raced. If those reinforcements broke through, the entire plan would collapse. She signaled Hawk, who caught her meaning and nodded. They needed to end this fight quickly. Summoning courage, Sam rolled to a new position and fired a series of shots into the SUV's engine block. The vehicle sputtered smoke billowing from under the hood. Boyd and 2 other bikers bailed out, diving for cover. That was enough to throw their formation into disarray. Hawks seized the opening, leaping from cover and advancing toward the truck, weapon raised. His sudden aggression rattled the bikers, forcing them to split their attention. Walker, meanwhile, had crept behind a nearby cluster of rocks that flanked the newly arrived reinforcements. With a deft motion, he tossed a flashbang into their path. The explosion of light and sound sent the bikers reeling. C capitalized, picking off the ones who attempted to flee. The glare. The fight raged in a maelstrom of gunfire, dust, and shouting. Sam felt every second stretch into an eternity. The line between life and death, razor thin, but the combined pressure of their ambush was taking its toll on the Stone Jackal. One by one, the bikers faltered, some pinned down, others fleeing into the night on foot, in the flickering chaos. Sam forced herself to remain calm, to ignore the buzz of bullets and the acrid stench of gunpowder. She focused on the simple, urgent truth. Willow's end depended on them if they failed. Here the town would fall to the Stone Jackal's iron grip, and that was a fate Sam refused to allow. Looking back on everything that unfolded, the fear, the hope, the daring stands made under desert starlight, it's clear that you and resolve can overcome even the most daunting foes. Our silent bartender, once haunted by her past, discovered renewed strength in the bond she formed with the town's people and her old comrades. Together, they reclaimed Willow's End from the grip of the Stone Jackal, proving that trust, courage, and resilience can prevail all over intimidation and brutality today. The roadhouse hums with life again, and the desert sunsets feel a bit brighter. Scars remain both on the land and in the hearts of those who fought, but they serve as reminders of a victory that belonged to everyone. Thank you for listening to this journey from doubt to defiance. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Share your comments, ideas, and questions below. Let's keep the conversation going. Your insights make our story stronger and more meaningful.